Hello dear friends, you are watching Ruslan Beylov's channel, and this is our traditional daily report on the course of combat operations on the Ukrainian front. So over the past night, a notable event took place on Ukrainian territory. Judging by the combination of available indicators and official statements, the Oreshnik missile system, or a weapon of a similar class, was used once again. At the very least, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially stated that this specific type of weapon was employed. The footage that has appeared online indirectly confirms this information. What we see is the moment of impact. If you remember the videos from Dnipropetrovsk, the visual picture looks almost identical. Ukrainian information outlets and public channels are also widely reporting that with a high degree of probability, it was indeed the Oreshnik. Now let us move directly to the overview of the situation along the front line. Despite the ongoing holiday period, the past 24 hours have been quite intense from a military standpoint. Serious and, most importantly, significant advances have been recorded. Moreover, during this time one settlement was taken, and perhaps the key event was that the Russian army entered another strategically important city. But let us go through everything step by step. As in several previous reports in a row, we will begin with the Kupiansk direction. This is already the fourth consecutive time we are opening the overview with this section of the front, and the reason is obvious. There has been a sharp and large-scale escalation of activity here, coming exclusively from the Russian side rather than from the armed forces of Ukraine. What happened over the past day? The following occurred. We are seeing extremely serious advances by units of the West group of forces. I want to clarify an important point right away. This is not an advance that literally took place yesterday. In reality, the maneuver was carried out several days earlier, but the information arrived with a delay, and only now have the changes been fully reflected on the maps. So, what do we have in practical terms? The advance exceeded 7 kilometers. In fact, it was even more than 7.5 kilometers. This looks truly extraordinary. And it is not just a matter of moving the front line forward. Russian units also entered the settlement of Podoli. Information on whether it is fully under Russian control currently varies. However, like the cartographers, we rely on objective control data. Based on this data, the settlement is marked as being under Russian control. At the same time, it must be understood that for stable and complete control of the village, it is necessary to clear the adjacent forested areas. At present, these areas have not yet been fully cleared, and Ukrainian units remain there. Therefore, it will be possible to speak confidently about 100% control only after these operations are completed. Even so, the progress here is truly striking. The advance exceeded 7 kilometers, and the total area brought under control amounts to more than 18 square kilometers. A logical question arises: why is the Ukrainian defense collapsing here so rapidly? The answer is fairly obvious. The Ukrainian side is currently concentrating its main forces on attempts to hold and retake Kupiansk. As a result, they have begun to experience serious problems on the bridgehead on the left bank of the Oskil River. A few days ago, we already analyzed the situation in Kurilivka, where Russian units advanced by about 4 kilometers. Now we are observing an even larger scale advance, this time in the Podoli area. Another important point should be highlighted separately. The width of the so-called bottleneck exit from this area is only about 2.5 kilometers. If this corridor is cut off, Ukrainian units located in Kucherivka and Petropavlivka risk ending up in complete encirclement. In addition, north of Kupiansk itself, Russian troops entered the settlement of Tishchenkivka. This fact has already been confirmed by OSINT analysts. Essentially, when it became clear that the situation inside Kupiansk was becoming complicated due to logistical problems, the Russian command decided to focus first on ensuring stable supply routes on the western bank of the Oskil River. From a military standpoint, this is exactly where operations should have begun. However, initially Russian units entered the city itself and subsequently found themselves in a vulnerable position, which Ukrainian forces were able to exploit. At the same time, it is important to note that no one expected such a rapid and large-scale collapse of Ukrainian defenses in the western part of Kupiansk. That is precisely why events unfolded in this manner. Now the Russian army is effectively building a new bridgehead here almost from scratch, and the main objective is to form a sufficiently wide corridor in order to avoid a repeat of logistical problems in the future. Now let us move on to the next major thrust by the Russian army, which was actively reported by almost all Telegram channels yesterday evening. However, somewhat paradoxically, this advance did not even become the main frontline news of the day. The primary headline, of course, was the repeated use of the Oreshnik. Meanwhile, the key frontline development was the breakthrough and entry of Russian forces into a new city, Sviatohirsk. Here, the advance amounted to nearly 4 kilometers, and as a result, fighting for the city itself has begun. This is undoubtedly a serious success. However, there is one extremely important nuance that must be mentioned. The key to controlling Sviatohirsk lies in the heights south of the city, where the Sviatohirsk Lavra is located. Until these heights are taken under Russian control, clearing and holding the city will be extremely difficult. If one looks at a topographic map, the difference in elevation becomes obvious. The main part of Sviatohirsk, which Russian units have entered, lies in a lowland, while on the opposite bank of the river there are dominant heights currently occupied by Ukrainian forces. If Ukrainian units retain their positions there, the city effectively becomes a shooting gallery. By the way, in 2022, Russian troops had already entered Sviatohirsk and taken control of the northern bank, but they failed to dislodge Ukrainian forces from the southern heights, and as a result, control over the city was eventually lost. Therefore, the current advance clearly indicates serious problems in Ukrainian defenses, but the decisive factor will be the establishment of control over these heights. Next, another advance was recorded in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Units of the East Group of forces crossed the Haichur River at another location and pushed Ukrainian forces out of the settlement of Bratske. Thus, yet another village in the Dnipropetrovsk region has come under Russian control. The bridgehead on the western bank of the Haichur continues to expand, and in the end, the Ukrainian forces were unable to hold the defensive line along the river. As for the prospects following the capture of Bratske, movement will undoubtedly continue westward. This means further pressure on Ukrainian defenses, as well as the potential blocking of the urban-type settlement of Ternavate from the north. There are also reports that today, Russian troops captured the settlement of Zelin. This indicates that offensive operations in this area have returned to their usual rhythm for the Russian army. Units of the East Group, as is typically the case, promptly provided video footage of combat operations and confirmed locations that are already under Russian control. Pokrovsk direction. Here, Russian units are attempting to push the front line from the Rodinsky area toward Belitske and Dobropilya. North of Sharkov, the clearing of Toretsk continues. The fighting there is heavy, but very little remains to be done, essentially just one street. Most likely, this is precisely why the Ministry of Defense has not yet officially announced that the settlement has been fully taken under control. At the same time, fighting is beginning in the Pavlivka area. Kostiantynivka direction. Russian units have achieved success south of Kostiantynivka, advancing toward the settlement of Ilinivka. In fact, they have already reached the southern outskirts of this village. At the same time, Ilinivka itself is closely connected to Kostiantynivka, and if Russian troops enter this settlement, it can be considered that they have entered Kostiantynivka from the south. Overall, fairly significant successes are being recorded in this sector. Simultaneously, very fierce fighting continues to the north, in the areas of Verolyubivka and Markove, where Russian troops are conducting assault operations. The Ukrainian side is defending these positions with great determination. Sloviansk direction. Intense fighting is underway in the area of Reznikivka, south of Zakotne, as well as before, in the area of Nikiforivka. In the Lyman sector, reports are emerging that Russian units have entered the city from the north and are attempting to gain a foothold. The very fact that the front line in the zone of responsibility of the 25th Army has approached Lyman from the northern direction and begun assault operations is an extremely important development. It is no coincidence that Kyiv has been increasingly desperate over the past 2 weeks, claiming that Russian forces have managed to significantly cut the logistics of the Ukrainian grouping in the Lyman area. Sumy direction. Russian units have achieved success south of Oleksivka and are gradually approaching Kyanitsia. Very little remains before reaching the northern outskirts of Sumy. Ukrainian defenses here are noticeably weakening. They are in urgent need of reserves, and where exactly they will be able to obtain them remains a major question. Zaporizhzhia direction. Units of the Dnipro group of forces continue to wedge themselves into the defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine between two fortified lines in the area of Novoyakivlivka. According to available data, a significant part of this settlement has already come under Russian control. At the same time, the Russian armed forces have begun fighting for Pavlivka. The key objective here is to push beyond Yurkivka and seize the dominant heights, which would effectively cut off Oreshnik from its northern supply routes and place its garrison in a state of operational encirclement. After completing the clearing of Primorska, Russian troops will attempt to advance toward Magdalenivka and break through Ukrainian defenses in the direction of Kamyshuvaka, thereby creating a bridgehead for a future offensive on Zaporizhzhia. Summing up the overall results of the advances over the past day, more than 30 square kilometers of territory and one settlement have come under Russian control. This is the best result not only for January, but for 2026 as a whole so far. This concludes the overview of advances along the front line. We now move on to an analysis of the political situation. In Dnipropetrovsk, a nationwide emergency situation has been recorded. The city has been partially left without power. All boiler houses have been completely disconnected from the electricity supply. The left bank part of the city is functioning exclusively on reserve power sources. Electricity supply to medical facilities is being restored gradually, although all hospitals were initially switched to autonomous energy sources. Sewer systems are operating in emergency mode. Generators are running on the left bank, while the water supply situation on the right bank, according to the mayor, is beginning to stabilize. United States, Ukraine, negotiations in Florida. Talks were held there yesterday, during which the United States is attempting to pressure Kyiv into making territorial concessions. According to information reported by Yuri Podolyaka, Washington is trying to persuade Volodymyr Zelensky to agree to surrender Donbass without fighting, since without such a step, Russia refuses to agree to a ceasefire. For the current Ukrainian leadership, this scenario is extremely painful. In addition, the United Kingdom and European countries are opposed to such concessions. However, the lesson that the United States previously taught Kyiv, using the example of the former head of the presidential office, Yermak, has clearly been absorbed. Washington has clearly demonstrated that it also holds serious leverage. Which position will ultimately prevail should become clear in the near future. At the same time, I do not believe that Marco Rubio will be able to break Kyiv's resistance so easily, or rather that of London standing behind it. Based on the actual outcome of the negotiations, one can conclude that no agreements were reached. The meeting with the Ukrainian side was quite productive. We still have more work to do, Marco Rubio stated. Translated from diplomatic language, this means only one thing. The sides did not agree on anything. Meanwhile, Europe, according to Alexander Kotz, has begun to backtrack on the issue of possibly deploying its troops on Ukrainian territory. Chancellor Merz stated that the formation and deployment of multinational forces as part of security guarantees is impossible without Russia's consent. This raises a logical question. Why such a sharp reversal? At the same time, around 15,000 French and British troops, according to available information, are already on high readiness. It is interesting how exactly European countries intend to obtain Russia's consent to deploy contingents in Ukraine, given that this directly contradicts one of the key objectives of the special military operation. What are they prepared to offer in return? The lifting of sanctions. Yes, sanctions certainly create difficulties, but not to the extent that Russia would agree to the presence of NATO troops near its borders. Moreover, trusting the West after the experience of the Minsk agreements looks, to put it mildly, naive. Apparently, European leaders will ultimately prefer to stay at home. After all, Merz, Macron and Starmer clearly do not measure up to Bismarck, Napoleon or Churchill. Meanwhile, Tucker Carlson stated that the United States vitally needs normal and stable relations with Russia, because without them, Washington will not be able to survive a global confrontation with China. According to him, if one soberly assesses how the world would begin to fracture in the event of such a conflict and thinks about it for even 20 or 30 seconds, it becomes obvious. The United States needs relations with Russia in order to survive such a scenario. The reason is extremely simple: scale and resources. Russia is the largest country in the world and possesses enormous reserves of resources. This includes energy, oil and gas, a wide range of minerals, gold, and much more. An alliance with Russia is necessary. The main thing that must not be allowed, something Donald Trump has said many times, is the formation of a stable Russia-China bloc. In that case, the United States would be confronted with the majority of the planet's population, the largest demographic bloc in the world, the largest landmass, and, if the two economies are combined, effectively the most powerful economic system on Earth. This must not be allowed to happen. It is absolutely clear that the previous US administration deliberately pushed Russia into an alliance with China, and that alliance now exists. To speak as plainly as possible, if Donald Trump wants to carry out a single act as president that would forever secure him a place in history as a hero, it would be restoring Russia to a strategic alliance with the United States. Is Russia bad? After Venezuela, such claims sound, to put it mildly, dubious and are simply exhausting. Russia is neither good nor bad. Russia is vitally necessary for the United States. America will not survive a global conflict if Russia and China stand united against it. Period. Everything is extremely simple, and at this stage, such a deal should not be excessively complicated.